Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to our live Bayside Seniors Healthy Aging Festival for 2021. Today, we have a wonderful guest speaker event for you with Don McQueen, the Bush Balladeer. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. We acknowledge the Boon Wurrung people, the traditional owners of the land where Bayside City Council is located. Today, as we come together virtually, many of us join from the traditional lands across different parts of the Kulin Nation. Wherever we are today, we honour the strength and resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and pay our respects to all elders, past, present, and emerging. We acknowledge that together we share a responsibility to nurture this land and sustain it for future generations. My name is Katrina Wotherspoon, and I am the Healthy Aging Community Development Officer at Bayside City Council. And it is my absolute pleasure today to introduce the amazing Don McQueen. Don, a multi-award-winning Bush Balladeer, delivers Australian poetry with exceptional passion and flair. You'll feel as though you're sitting with him around the campfire as he tells engaging stories, recites some of the most classic Australian bush poetry, and some hilarious modern poems that will truly fascinate you. Don's love of the Australian history and bush poetry is equalled by his love for cricket. This led to the creation of the Hume and Hovell Cricket Ground at Strath Creek, a village green, English-style cricket ground right in the heart of the Australian bush. Don's involvement in community affairs is widely known, and he often lends his talents to support community projects. I have no doubt that you will love Don's stirring renditions of our famous Australian writers of verse. Please note that this session will actually be recorded today for those that couldn't join us. There will also be a short 2-minute survey at the conclusion of this event today, which will assist us in delivering an even more exceptional Australian and Bayside Seniors Healthy Aging Festival for 2022. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy your time with Don this afternoon. Over to you, Don.
G'day, everybody. Thank you, Katrina. Yes, I've been looking forward to this very much, sharing with you all some of Australia's great writers of Australian literature. We've been so lucky in this great country that we live in. We've had some wonderful, wonderful writers, and I was one of the lucky ones. I was introduced to the glory of Australian poetry and literature when I was in grade 6 at a primary school. Some of you might remember those school readers that we used to use in those days. They were chock-a-block full of wonderful stories and poetry. And this particular teacher that I had, regardless of where the curriculum was up to, on a Friday afternoon after afternoon playtime, he'd slam the book on the class activities, and he would read, or rather sometimes get the class to read, short stories and Australian bush verse. And with this one student, that fell on fertile soil, and that gave me my start and my love, and I've been at it ever since. So I reckon I was lucky to have such a good teacher. My enthusiasm for Australian poetry may have manifested later in life. I'll never know, but I'm so grateful to that particular teacher. Of all the writers of poetry that we have, they were often featured in those readers, and I'm going to share some works today of some of a couple of the great ones. Now, Australian poetry has its own rhythms. It has its own style. It has its own culture. And it basically has 3 ingredients to it all. For example, firstly, there's adventure. Now, the man from Snowy River is adventure. There's sadness, because there was a lot of sadness out in the bush in those early days of the early settlers and pioneers. And thirdly, there's humour. We have got a remarkable sense of humour unique to us, and that reflects in some of our poetry. So the works that I'm going to do for you this afternoon will have those three ingredients spread across the day. But I'm going to start with my favourite, could be yours, and that's Banjo Patterson. And the poem that I'm going to start with was the poem that gave him his great start from when he was practicing as a lawyer. And he wrote this poem about his dream, what he really wanted to do. And he expressed that so beautifully that when this poem was published in 1891 in the Bulletin, it caused great acclaim, so much so that it gave rise for him to want to leave the law and go out into the bush and be our, in my view, greatest writer. The poem, now you all know it, it's, anyone guess? It is Clancy of the Overflow. Now, listen for Banjo's dream. I had written him a letter, which I had, for want of better knowledge, sent to where I met him, down the Lachlan, years ago. He was shearing when I knew him, so I sent the letter to him, just on spec, addressed as follows: Clancy of the Overflow. And an answer came directed, in a writing unexpected, and I think the same was written with a thumbnail dipped in tar. 'Twas his shearing mate who wrote it, and verbatim I will quote it. Clancy's gone to Queensland droving, and we don't know where he are. In my wild, erratic fancy, visions come to me of Clancy, gone a droving down the Cooper, where the western drovers go. As the stock are slowly stringing, Clancy rides behind them singing, for a drover's life has pleasures that the townsfolk never know. And the bush has friends to meet him, and their kindly voices greet him with the murmur of the breezes and the river on its bars. And he sees the vision splendid of the sunlit plains extended, and at night the wondrous glory of the everlasting stars. I am sitting in my dingy little office, where a stingy ray of sunlight struggles feebly down between the houses tall, with the fetid air and gritty of the dusty, dirty city through the open window floating spreads its foulness over all. And in place of lowing cattle, I can hear the fiendish rattle of the buses and the tramways making hurry down the street, and the language, uninviting, of the gutter children fighting comes fitfully and faintly through the ceaseless tramp of feet. And the hurrying people daunt me, and their pallid faces haunt me as they shoulder one another in their nervous rush and haste, with their eager eyes and greedy, and their stunted forms and weedy, for the townsfolk have no time to grow, they have no time to waste. And somehow, I rather fancy that I'd like to change with Clancy and take a turn at droving as the seasons come and go, while he faced the rounds eternal of the cash book and the journal. But I doubt he'd suit the office, Clancy of the Overflow. Did you remember that one? He made his dream pretty clear. And it's a remarkable thing when you stop to consider, you know, when he made that decision to leave the law and become a writer, That changed his life forever. But ladies and gentlemen, it also changed our life forever too. Because had he remained a lawyer in Sydney, I doubt whether you folk would know of Andrew Barton Patterson. So it changed a lot of lives, that decision that he made. I'm going to stay with banjo, and I'm going to do another one now, which was also in one of the grade readers, and you probably will remember it, but it's called The Bush Christening. On the outer Barcoo, where churches are few, and men of religion are scanty, on roads seldom crossed, except where men are lost, is where Michael McGee kept a shanty. Now, this Mike was the dad of a 10-year-old lad. He was plump, healthy, and stoutly conditioned. He was as strong as the best, but poor Mike had no rest, for the youngster had never been christened. And his wife used to cry, "Should our little darling die, St. Peter won't recognise him." But with luck, he survived till a preacher arrived who agreed straight away to baptise him. Now the artful young rogue, while they held their collogue, with his ear to the keyhole was listening. And he muttered in fright, and his features turned white. "What in the devil and all is this christening?" He was none of your dolts. He'd seen them brand colts. So it seemed to his small understanding that if the man in the frock makes me one of the flock, it must be very much like branding. So away with a rush he set off for the bush, while the tears in his eyelids they glistened. "'Tis outrageous," said he, "to brand youngsters like me. I'll be dashed if I'll stop and be christened." Like a young native dog, he ran into a log, while his parents in vain did reprove him. Till his reverence spoke, he was fond of a joke. "I've a notion," said he, "that will move him. Poke a stick up the log, give the spalpeen a prog. Take it easy, don't hurt him or maim him. 'Tis not long that he'll stand, and I'll have the water at hand. When he comes out this end, I'll name him." Oh, here he comes now. Oh, the shame. I've forgotten his name. Was it Patsy or Michael or Dennis? Here the youngster ran out, and the priest gave a shout, "Take your chance anyhow with McGuinness." As the howling young cub took off for the scrub, where he knew that pursuit would be risky, the priest, as he fled, flung a flask at his head that was labelled McGuinness's whiskey. Now, McGuinness McGee has been made a JP, and the one thing he hates more than sin is to be asked by the folk who have heard of the joke how he came to be christened McGuinness. I suppose some of you would remember that. Yes, all good humorous stuff. I'm going to do another one of banjos, which is on the humorous side as well. And again, from one of the school readers. And in this particular poem, there is, in the middle of it, there is a swear word. Not a very bad swear word, one that some of you could well have even used this very day. So it's not that bad. And when we were kids, we weren't allowed to use this word at home or at Sunday school or at church or in the classroom or even in the playground. But when it came to reading this poem in the classroom itself, because it was inscribed in the story, we were able to use the word, and we grabbed the opportunity with both hands and with gusto. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I come to this word in the poem, I'm going to hesitate for a moment and give you, listeners, the opportunity to join in the program and use the word. So it'll be your turn. Okay? Have we got a deal? Okay, we got a deal. Now, the poem, you might have guessed by now, is The Man from Ironbark. It was the man from Ironbark who struck the Sydney town. He wandered over street and park. He wandered up and down. He loitered here. He loitered there till he was like to drop, until at last, in sheer despair, he sought a barber's shop. Here, shave me beard and whiskers off. I'll be a man of mark. I'll go and play the Sydney toff back home in Ironbark. The barber man was short and flash, as mostly barbers are. He wore a strike-your-fancy sash, and he smoked a huge cigar. He was a humorist of note, and keen at repartee. He laid the odds and kept a tote, whatever that may be. But when he saw our friend arrive, he whispered, "Here's a lark. Just watch me catch him all alive, this man from Ironbark." There were some gilded youths who sat along the barber's wall. Their eyes were dull, their heads were flat. They had no brains at all. To them, the barber passed the wink. His dexter eyelid shut. Just watch me make this yokel think his bloomin' throat was cut. So, as he soaked and rubbed it in, he made a rude remark. "I guess the flats are pretty green up there in Ironbark." A grunt was all reply he got, and he shaved the bushman's chin. He made the water boiling hot, and he dipped the razor in. He raised his arm. His brow grew black. He paused a while to gloat, then slashed the red-hot razor back across his victim's throat. Upon the newly shaven skin, it made a livid mark. It no doubt fairly took him in, the man from Ironbark. He fetched a wild up-country yell that might wake the dead to hear, and his throat, he knew full well, was cut from ear to ear. He struggled gamely to his feet to face his murderous foe. "You've done for me, you dog, I'm beat. One hit before I go. I only wish that I had a knife, you blessed murdering shark. But you'll remember all your life, the man from Ironbark." He lifted up one hairy paw, and with a tremendous clout, it landed on the barber's jaw, and he knocked the barber out. He set about with nail and tooth to make the place a wreck. He grabbed the nearest gilded youth and tried to break his neck. And all the while, his throat he held to save his vital spark and murder. "Bloody murder!" yelled the man from Ironbark. A peeler who had heard the din came in to see the show. He tried to run the bushman in, but he refused to go, until at last the barber spoke and said, "'Twas all in fun. 'Twas just a harmless little joke, a trifle overdone." "A joke," he cried. "By George, that's fine. A likely sort of lark. I'd like to catch that murderous swine one night in Ironbark." And now, around the shearing floor, the listening shearers gape. He tells the story o'er and o'er and brags of his escape. "Them barber chaps what keeps a tote. By George, I've had enough. One tried to cut me bloomin' throat, but thank the Lord it's tough. But Whether he's believed or no, there's one thing to remark, that flowing beards are all the go up there in Ironbark. Did you all remember the word in the middle? I hope you took advantage of the opportunity to use it. Okay, well, I'm going to move on now to Henry Lawson. Henry Lawson was quite the opposite in every way, shape, or form that you can think of to Banjo Patterson. He had a very lowly education. His only teacher was his mother, who relieved teachers in outback New South Wales. He had some problems in life. The father was often away, fencing, shepherding, or shearing. He was deaf in one ear. He had problems with alcohol later in life, and he died prematurely at only age 55, which was tragic for him, of course, but also it was a tragedy for us, because it probably, his early passing probably cost us, the Australian people, maybe, who knows, 10 years of Henry's best works. Such was his gift for writing stories and poetry. He was known as the great storyteller, the great storyteller. I'm going to do one of his poems. In fact, this poem I'm going to do is, I believe, and my view only, was the best poem that Henry Lawson has given us. The best poem amongst many great poems, I might add. It's a story that encapsulates the toxic relationship that used to exist between the early squatters and the selectors who came later. From the very first establishment of Australia, people just went out into the hinterland and took up these vast tracts of land and said, "This is mine." They just marked them out and said, "This is mine." They didn't buy the property from anyone. They just said, "This is mine." And they were huge holdings. And as time passed by, more people were arriving. Convicts were getting off their tickets of leave. And of course, in the early 1850s, with the gold rushes, many people arrived in Australia, most of whom chose to stay. This caused pressure on the government to open up some of these vast holdings and allow other people to select smaller holdings from these big pastoral runs. So there was bad blood between the squatters and the selectors. They didn't like each other. It also has a bushfire that goes throughout it, the story. There's family conflict contained. There's a love story in the poem, and it ends in a most beautiful Christian way. And the poem by the great storyteller is called "The Fire at Ross's Farm." The squatter saw his pastures wide decrease, as one by one, farmers moving to the west selected on his run. Selectors took the water up, and all the black soil round, the best grassland the squatter had, was spoiled by Ross's ground. Now, many schemes to shift old Ross had racked the squatter's brain, but Sandy had the stubborn blood of Scotland in his vein. He held the land and fenced it in. He cleared and ploughed the soil, and year by year, a richer crop repaid him for his toil. Between the homes for many years, the devil left its track. The squatter pounded Ross's stock, and Sandy pounded Black's. A well down on the lower run was filled with earth and logs, while Black laid baits about the farm to poison Ross's dogs. It was, indeed, a deadly feud of culture, creed, and race. So fate supplied a Romeo and a Juliet in the case. And more than once, across the flats, beneath the Southern Cross, young Robert Black was seen to ride with pretty Jenny Ross. One Christmas time, when months of drought had parched the western creeks, the bushfire started in the north and travelled south for weeks. At night, along the riverside, the scene was grand and strange. The hillfires lit up like lighted streets, like cities on the range. The cattle tracks between the trees were like long and dusty aisles, and on a sudden breeze, the fire would sweep along for miles. With the sound of distant musketry, it crackled through the brakes, and across the flats of silver grass, it hissed like angry snakes. It leapt across the flowing streams and passed through the pastures through. It climbed the trees and lit the boughs, and fiercer grew. The bees fell stifled in the smoke or perished in their hives, and with the stock, the kangaroos went flying for their lives. The sun had set on Christmas Eve, when through the scrublands wide, young Robert Black came riding home as only natives ride. He galloped to the homestead door and gave the first alarm. The fire is past the granite spur and just near Ross's farm. Now, father, you must send the men at once. They won't be wanted here. Poor Ross's wheat is all he has to pull him through the year. Then let it burn, the squatter said. I'd like to see it done. I'd bless the fire if it would clear selectors from the run. Go if you will, the squatter said. You shall not take the men. Go and join your precious friends. But don't come here again. I won't come back, young Robert cried, and reckless in his ire, he sharply turned his horse's head and galloped towards the fire. And there, for 3 long, weary hours, half blind from smoke and heat, old Ross and Robert fought the flames that neared the ripened wheat. The farmer's hand was nerved by fear of danger and of loss, while Robert fought the stubborn foe for the love of Jenny Ross. But serpent-like, its curves and lines slipped past them and between until they reached the boundary where the old coach road had been. The track is now our only chance. It's here we must stand, cried Ross. There's naught on earth can stop the fire if once it gets across. But then came a cruel gust of wind, and with a fearful rush, the flames leapt o'er the narrow path and lit the fence of brush. The crop must burn, the farmer cried. We cannot save it now. And down upon the blackened ground, he dashed his ragged bough. But then, in a rush of hope, his heart began to beat. For all the crackling of the flames, he heard the sound of horses' feet. Here's help at last, young Robert cried. And even as he spoke, the squatter and a dozen men came racing through the smoke. Down on the ground the stockmen jumped and bared each brawny arm. They tore green branches from the trees and fought for Ross's farm. And when, before the gallant band, the beaten flames gave way, 2 grimy hands in friendship joined for it was Christmas Day. How about all those different emotions running through that wonderful story by Henry Lawson, the great storyteller? As I said, I think that's the best poem that Henry has given us. I'm going to tell you a story now about a country barber. Now, this barber, not the one that Banjo spoke about in the man from Ironbark, but another country barber who used to, if he got the chance, to take the mickey out of his customers. He tried his usual trick this day on this particular customer, and you'll see how it bounced back on him. I was in the barber's chair one day. There's only one back home, when I mentioned, as he saw me, that I planned a trip to Rome. And foolishly I mentioned then that all good Catholics hope to venture to the Vatican and get to see the Pope. What a silly dream, he sniggered. Has religion turned your head? Go to Mass on Sunday mornings here and save yourself the bread. There'll be 90,000 pilgrims breathing garlic in your ear and a figure on the balcony you'll never get to hear. You've been struck by mob hysteria. It's really made you blind. The rattle of the rosary has eaten out your mind. You'll strut around the pubs back home, and every day you'll skite how you saw some dim old gentleman and you thought his coat was white. Well, he nicked me with his razor, then he would have winned some more. So I pushed me money at him and I bolted out the door. But in spite of what he told me, no matter how strange it looked, I reckoned I would go to Rome. So I got me ticket booked. And so I went. And I enjoyed myself. Had a real fantastic trip. And on return, I sought the barber's chair to risk another clip. Aha! Here's the great world traveller, he chortled with a bow. He's been to see the Pope, you know. He's much more righteous now. How did you find his eminence? Come on, come on, come on. Don't keep us guessing. Tell all your wretched barmates how you earned the papal blessing. Well, I said, this may seem rather boastful and a trifle trite to you, but I got to see the Vatican and I met the Pontiff too. Now, I know this might seem unlikely, but he saw me standing there. Yes, me, of all the thousands packed into St. Peter's Square. And his piercing eyes dwelt on me. I couldn't look away as he spread his holy benison and murmured, "Let us pray." Well, we said our Pater Nostras and the crowd began to rise, but still I was the focus of the Holy Pontiff's eyes. I stiffened to attention, and if I started to relax, that fiery gaze burned into me and stopped me in my tracks. The crowd before me parted like the billows on the sea, and then I realised that His Holiness was walking straight to me. He checked his progress now and then, some sinner to embrace, but his point of concentration never shifted from my face. I sank down on the cobblestones. My breath began to wheeze. A little pool of water formed around my quaking knees. Now, this was no idle fantasy. 90,000 pilgrims saw me. The holy Prince of Christendom came down and stood before me. He placed his hands upon my head and said, I kid you not, what a rotten bloody haircut. That barber should be shot. So there you go. Now, Katrina, is there any chance that I can see the audience, or is that not possible? I don't know, Katrina, whether you heard that, but obviously not.
I might pass that over to Chloe on the other side. I'll send her a message.
Just wondering who I've got in front of me, that's all.
That's okay, I know. It's a bit different in virtual land, isn't it?
Certainly is.
Leave it with me. I'll see if I can get something.
But I see there's one name in front of me, Judy Page. Judy, are you the Judy Page that I know? She's muted.
She's muted.
Oh,
I don't think so, Dawn. No, I don't think so.
Right. Different one.
Yeah,
no.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. No, that's all right. Okay, well, I'll press on. Now, I can't see the audience, Katrina, but are they like senior age people?
Yes, we're in Seniors Festival, so our main demographic is from age 55 plus.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's okay. That means that the audience, that particularly you women, and I presume there's more women than men, is that right?
There probably is a few more. Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
We've got a mixture, but yes, looks like
okay.
a few lovely ladies.
Well, ladies, the story I'm about to tell, it's for mature age ladies, that possibly some of you ladies may well have been through the circumstances that I'm about to describe. And I was going to suggest that if you have been through the circumstances that I'm about to describe, we should have a chat afterwards and compare notes. But let's see what would happen. This poem is called Mulligan's Mob. Old Mulligan's shack lay well off the track, on a run that was stony and sour, a settler's block. It was hard as a rock, with no telephone, water or power. And old Mulligan too was as tough as a roo, though he'd mellowed considerably, for he'd wed late in life, and his darling young wife was expecting their first progeny. Now, the prospect he had of becoming a dad filled Mulligan's heart with joy, and he knew that he ought to be pleased with a daughter, but secretly he hoped for a boy. A strapping young lad. He could help his old dad and see his mum came to no harm. He'd be handsome and game, and he'd have the Mulligan name and the dubious bequest of the farm. He sent for his sister a fortnight before. She was skilled in midwifery's art. As his darling wife grew, he knew she was due by the dates on his old carbon chart. Then early one morning, as Mulligan dreamed of the future in store for his son, he was woken in fear by a voice in his ear. Wake up, Pat. I think me time's come. Well, he flew into action like Mulligan could. He lit the lantern and stoked up the fire. He woke up his sister and split some more wood, then dressed in delivery attire. As time shuffled by, the tension ran high as his poor wife lay gasping and panting, while Mulligan stood like petrified wood with a white-knuckled grip on the lantern. Then very soon after, midst crying and laughter, relief intermingled with joy. In that little bush shack on Mulligan's track, the midwife delivered a boy. As the young fella screamed, the Mulligan beamed. On that morning he'd never forget. Then he heard his wife say, in her casual way, "I don't think I've quite finished yet." As the words that she said spun round in his head, his sister flew into top gear. She said, "Well, fancy that. Hold the land still, Pat. I think there's another one here." By the flickering light, they could see she was right, and they marvelled from one to the other. Then, "Push now, my love," and his wife gave a shove. Then old Mulligan's son had a brother. As the second son squealed, old Mulligan reeled. He was stunned by his wife's awesome plumbing. And quite unprepared, when the midwife declared, "I think there's another one coming." As old Mulligan looked, his wife's body shook and her face wore a trance-like expression. His sister said, "Pat, well, how about that?" As two daughters arrived in succession. Now, the next little while was recalled with a smile by his sister for many years after. And the Mulligan crew saw the joke in it too, though it very well near was a disaster. At the sight of four babies, all squealing and damp, lined up at the foot of the bed, old Mulligan turned and blew out the lamp as if something had snapped in his head. But then, from the darkness, came his terrified roar as his wife gave a final contraction. "I've got 4 on the floor. I don't want any more. It must be the light that attracts them." Now the years have rolled by and the laughter rings high round the table at Mulligan's camp as 4 kids want to know of that time long ago when old Mulligan blew out the lamp. Now, ladies, I can't see you, of course, but I would say pass it on to Katrina if any of you have been through that same circumstance. I'd be very interested to know. Anyway, well, I'm glad I've got some senior citizens in the audience because I'm going to do a couple of senior citizens' poems who are members of a senior cits club. These poems were written by a fella by the name of Bill Cairns, who wrote a lot of good work about senior cits. And he uses throughout his stories the same names or the same characters, but he just puts them in different scenarios. So I'm going to do 2 of Bill's. And the first one is the Senior Cits Meat Raffle. Now, some of you, probably all of you, have been in a meat raffle, so you know how they work. But I think you'll like this one. It was the monthly highlight in the town of Woollybuck. All the oldies in the town would gather round to try their luck. They'd all get their good gear on after they've had their tub for the Senior Cits Meat Raffle at the local bowling club. Now, selling tickets on the door would be Jennifer McCall, while Fred Wilson had his ticket table halfway down the hall. And when all the tickets had been sold, they'd draw them one by one, and the winners would rush up to the meat table like a shot out of a gun. The first one out might draw themselves a great big leg of lamb, while the last one to the table might just get some cold sliced ham. But it all works like clockwork, and it's not complicated until the fatal night when the ticket sellers' ticket books were duplicated. Now, selling tickets on the door would be Jenny on the door was selling tickets at Diamonds Red, while Diamonds Red were being sold from the table run by Fred. And when all the tickets had been sold for the long-awaited game, for every ticket held, there was another just the same. First one out, Diamonds Red number 23. Agnes Wilson gave a little squeal and said, "That's me." As she hurried to the meat table for the coveted first pick, Bessie Laws yelled out, "Bull dust!" And she grabbed her walking stick. "I've got number 23, and it's a Diamonds Red. You must have read your ticket wrong, you stupid cow," she said. She hurried to the meat table like a V8 battering ram, where 4 hands fastened grimly around the biggest leg of lamb. The language, it was shocking in this dreadful tug of war as Agnes and Bessie fought and scratched and rolled around the floor. The president was horrified. He did not know what to do, and in the confusion, he drew the next number. Diamonds Red number 32. Percy Jones yelled out, "You beauty," and headed for the table, but he was quickly overtaken by his next door neighbour, Mabel. She was heading for the tray of steak that he was heading for, but Bessie Law's walking stick brought her crashing to the floor. The president totally panicked in the face of all this action. He had to come up with a plan to cause a small distraction. He drew the next number, Diamonds Red number 44, and 2 more senior cits joined in the brawl out on the floor. Diamonds Red number 61, called the president in a panic, and Dawn Brown grabbed her walking frame with a look that was satanic. Jono picked his ticket up and headed for the meat, but that walking frame could really move, and it was a dead heat. Dawn said, "It's mine," as she waved her ticket in his face. "People like you should be put down. You're just a disgrace." Jono said, "You might be right, or you might be stupid. I don't really care which. But get your fingers off my pickled pork, you stupid bloody woman." Then the meat table tipped over in the middle of the fight. There was chops and snags amongst the senior cits. It was not a pretty sight. The oldies looked at all that meat. You couldn't hold them back. And like crows onto a roadkill, they swooped to the attack. Then Freda, on her electric scooter, really came alive. She headed for the fight and stuck it into 4-wheel drive. She ran over half a dozen and loaded some meat up on the rack and drove straight out through the doorway without once ever looking back. Percy Jones was on the floor, looking pretty crook, as Bessie Laws was looking pretty crook, as Agnes Wilson struck him with a size 12 frozen chook. Jono's face was bleeding from a flying midi glass, and Bessie Law's walking stick was sticking up his jumper. The floor was strewn with unrolled roasts and tufts of torn out hair. There was blood and teeth and sausage meat flying everywhere. some mongrel dogs were passing by, looking for a thrill. They smelt the meat and saw the fight and went in for the kill. But those oldies were not wimps. They put up quite a fight, while those mongrels chewed on soup bones and everything else in sight. The president said, "Well, blow me down." As he regained his calm repose, he trotted over to the exit door and got the fire hose. Now the oldies all recovered from events that fatal night, and the bowling club put up a sign in memory of the fight. But to save any embarrassment to oldies in the crowd, it didn't mention any names. It just said, "No dogs allowed." Okay, well, I'm going to do one more of Bill Ken's. Again, as I said earlier, with the same characters, but different scenarios. Now, these folk this time, they've got that little bit older, and the senior cits have now graduated to the local nursing home. And this one is about their Christmas party that was cancelled. The Christmas party for the senior cits. The economic downturn had hit the town of Woollybuck. All the oldies in the nursing home were running out of luck. The management cut staff and food, and then, on top of that, their Christmas party had been cancelled, and they all felt pretty flat. But those oldies were determined to have their Christmas bash, in spite of a lack of food and drink and a total lack of cash. They started squirreling food away, as sneaky as can be, and they planned to make themselves a great big brew of herbal tea. The evening of the party came, and smiles were on their faces, and all that hoarded food was hauled out from hiding places. The night nurse did not bother them. She was fast asleep. They'd slipped some pills into her tea, and she didn't make a peep. Those nice young folk next door are growing herbs in their back shed. I'm sure they'd let us have some for our herbal tea, they said. There was no one home next door, but they didn't think that would be a drama. But they didn't know that those herbs were hydroponic marijuana. They picked a great big bunch and chopped it up and made a brew, and those oldies got stuck into it. They didn't have a clue. That herbal tea was popular. They couldn't get enough. So they went next door and cut more of the herbs and made heaps of the stuff. Now those oldies started feeling pretty good and put some music on. But before very long, all that hoarded food had very quickly gone. Jono said, "We need to get some grog and more food to eat." So he and Frida hopped on her electric scooter and took off down the street. When they reached the hotel drive-through, they skidded to a stop, and those two thirsty, spaced-out oldies hit the bottle shop. They loaded it up with chips and grog, some Coke and Bundy rum, and when the barman said, "That's $90, they said, "In your bum." They jumped back on the scooter and took off down the street. The barman chased for them for a while, but they soon had him beat. Now, those oldies were feeling pretty good, but their luck just couldn't last. Then Jono mooned a police car, and they had to get out of there real fast. but the cops hit lights and sirens. And going down the track after that scooter with the stolen grog and a flasher on the back. Frida had the hammer down while Jono did a freeze, hanging on for grim death with his trackies round his knees. They shot into the nursing home, but those cops were right behind, but they weren't prepared for what they were going to find. On a sofa, in a corner, like teenagers on a date, Percy Jones and Agnes Wilson were in a compromising state. There were 30 tripped out oldies on the floor with creaking bones, leaping around stark naked, dancing to the Rolling Stones. Some of them had passed out and lay snoring where they fell, and all that wobbly white flesh was like a scene from hell. The cops tried to restore order, but those oldies wouldn't hear. They thought the cops were party strippers and started ripping off their gear. Those lawmen were outnumbered. They quickly had enough of naked grannies screeching, "Get it off and strut your stuff." Clutching disappearing dignity, the police patrol retreated, too embarrassed to report how they had been defeated. They left those oldies raging. There was no way they could be stopped. They ate the chips and drank the grog and partied till they dropped. The nursing home staff arrived next day and put them all to bed. And fearing an investigation, nothing more was said. But the thought of naked grannies still fill those cops with fear, and they both get kind of twitchy if an oldie gets too near. But those oldies all recovered from their wild and drunken fling. They all slept for a week and couldn't remember a thing. Now the nursing home staff are preparing for next year's celebration. They're stocking up with Valium to control the situation. Okay, well, that just about does it for me. Katrina, can you unmute?
Hi, Don. Fantastic performance. Thank you so much. That was just amazing. I was having quite a giggle here watching you. You say it with such passion and flair, and I think our audience has very much enjoyed it from the comments we've seen coming through.
Well, because not being able to see the audience, I can't see whether they're laughing or crying.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both. I think there's lots of hand clapping, lots of smiles. Mary said, great to see and hear your performance, Don. We can see you and we're loving it. It's so hard when you can't see us. Thank you so much. Joy also commented she's enjoying the show. Paul said, what a hoot. Thanks, Don. Judy said she's loving it. Great yarn. Really enjoyed that one. Lots of smiley faces and clapping too. So it's hard. The virtual world's hard, John, isn't it? When we've got a webinar, it's a one-way presentation, which is really challenging.
We might try to look to the future, Katrina, and do a live show one day.
We would love to have you. Absolutely amazing. We've really, really enjoyed hosting you this afternoon, Don, and thank you for being a part of our Bayside Seniors Healthy Aging Festival today. What a great way to keep Aussie bush poetry alive, and really, really important for generations to come, and such a great show. We can't thank you enough. And thank you too. Sorry, Don.
To say some of the folk, if they're from retirement villages or whatever, or clubs that are looking for an entertainer, they can get my details from you.
Absolutely. We'd be more than happy to pass them on. And I do believe there is some aged care facilities that have tuned in with us today, which is fantastic, as well as our wonderful Bayside residents and community groups as well. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us and Don today. people are already asking how they can watch it again. So we will actually put the recording up onto our YouTube channel for anyone that's missed out on today or would like to relive and watch it back again. We'll absolutely have that done for you over the next day or so. And Sandra's also said, great to have such a laugh, Don. She's thoroughly enjoyed the show as well, which is fantastic. Joseph Jones as well said, thank you. What a great show. I have to say, not one person disappeared during that performance, Don. So that says it all. The audience was truly engaged and really enjoyed your performance. So we really thank you for that. Just to let everyone else know as well that the Festival Fun continues next week with a diverse range of activities. So we've got the next week starting off with a comedy show with Cal Wilson as part of Carers Week. And we'll learn about the history of Black Rot House and how to create a cool and comfortable home this summer, or simply participate in some exercises, just to name a few. So for a complete list of what's on, please visit our website or call the Healthy Aging team on 9599 4373. But now we would really appreciate you taking the time just to stay online for a couple of minutes and complete our short feedback survey, which will take approximately 2 minutes to complete. But please stay safe, everyone. Keep connected with each other and keep on keeping on. Happy Bayside Seniors Healthy Aging Festival, and thanks again for joining us. All the best.